Okay, here we go, waiting for one more. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion with our esteemed speakers. This room, the topic is CCS. So we have everybody here from all this morning's presentations. Really appreciate you guys making the time to be here with us and answer some of our pressing questions. Right now we have about 12 people in the room. So I'd be glad to kick things off with a question or two to get things started. Okay. So CCS has been a hot topic in the U.S. communities from the Midwest all the way to Louisiana, with reports focused on the fear of CO2 infrastructure and its risks. How do we as an industry work on navigating the path forward in a positive way, aligned with helping these communities see the value in what we're doing? I guess, Richard, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think some of it's gonna come with time. They're gonna want, there's the bigger chunk of the community is gonna want to see some of these projects have some success time. So, in-service dates and not have any problems. Lots of these, the first permit we filed for a client had over 500 protests filed. So, the community is concerned. It is a new technology. So I think the industry is going to have to be proactive on getting people comfortable with it. But it's kind of like everything else. It's just going to have to happen for a while and have some projects in service, in my opinion.
Anybody else would like to take that question? Charles, perhaps?
Forgive me, I just rolled in from another meeting. Ask the question one more time. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. The question was, how do we as an industry work on navigating the path forward in a positive way, aligned with helping the community see the value in what we're doing? Mostly we're like reporting or focusing on like the fear that people have about the CO2 infrastructure and the risks around it.
Sure. We, I'm gonna echo Richard's comments right there. I think community or stakeholder engagement is the most important thing. We've made it very important that we reach out and have contact with governmental stakeholders, but individuals in the community that we know in advance have previously been very vocal against carbon sequestration. In different communities we're in, I flew yesterday to meet with the Speaker of the House, the state of Louisiana. They're passing some legislation, potentially passing some legislation that would affect our industry. So I think meeting early and often compared to other industries to try to have town hall meetings. I mean, frankly, what we're doing, we've been doing for years. We've drilled tons of these wells, but for enhanced oil and gas recovery now in the last 4 years, we're a pure sequestration company. So there's nothing dangerous. The EPA, each state organization, be it the Texas Railroad Commission, the LDNR, are very involved from the get-go. And so we know what we're doing is safe. We're professionals. And if it's making sure that the communities know that, and for our business, it's making sure that they understand that most of the point source emitters that we are targeting, we're going to keep those industries going into the future.
Cool, good deal. Do you see CCS becoming more or less challenging over the next 5 years? That question's for Joe.
Yeah, I think it's going to get less and less, right? Especially as from a subsurface perspective, as the permitting becomes a little bit more routine. There's been some approved, but certainly not to the routine level that most oil and gas activities are. So I think as you get more and more of those under the belt from the regulator, I think that's going to help facilitate more of them getting approved in a more timely fashion. And just to the same point of successful projects getting runtime, I think once communities start to see these sorts of projects having years of runtime on them, that'll help the community outreach aspect in terms of getting folks comfortable with having this sort of activity in their neighborhoods where they in their areas where they haven't had in the past.
Anybody else like to chime in there?
Yeah, if I can, this is Steve. I agree with what Joe just said. I would like to add one more layer to the onion, however, in that in some aspects, these projects are going to become more and more difficult 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. And that is because all of the choice areas, choice locations, let's say the low-hanging fruit on the tree, it's going to be gone. All of the prime real estate, single large landowners for pore space rights, no subsurface features for complications to your projects, limited or no artificial penetrations. All of those tracts of lands, all of those pieces of real estate are getting gobbled up right now as we speak. And so the first round of permit applications is going through, keying off of those key pieces of real estate. Okay. And Joe's correct. As more and more of these permits get issued, applications get issued, permits get approved, projects get developed. Yes, the process itself is going to get more efficient and become more effective. However, the actual geology, the actual conditions in which we have to design around these projects is going to become more and more complicated as prime real estate disappears.
Yeah, that's fair. And the same for the point sources, right? You know, your ethanol plants, they're all going to be, you know, signed up first out of the gate. You know, it's your tougher to abate, you know, post-combustion type stuff that's going to be more challenging, more expensive to actually do the capturing side. Yeah, so from that sense, Steve's got a great point.
Yeah, I really appreciate you kind of peeling away that onion, like you said. A lot of good points in there. Conway, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I agree with that assessment. I mean, a lot of the subsurface sites are quite large. They've got many years of storage space, but it's kind of a first come, first serve, and location is a big deal in CCS right now. So I agree with that.
One of the things I noticed around a lot of y'all's presentations is the headaches around the issues with the permitting process. How do you address the agility of the current EPA acceptance rates for Class 6 permits? And then do you recommend a solution to this issue or a way to mitigate?
Well, we've been talking about this for a long time. You don't want to be permit application number 499 at EPA Region 6. You know, so it is a regulatory agency, and there is going to be a limit on staffing. And even if they want to farm it out and bring in consulting firms, you know, there's a limit of qualified firms. So I don't see the permit timeline improving anytime soon.
Charles, which region do you guys operate out of primarily, or which one are you primarily associated with?
We're in the last. I'm sorry. I thought you said Charles. Sorry, Richard.
I did say Charles. Sorry.
We're working about 5 of them right now, but primarily Gulf Coast. So EPA Region 6 out of Dallas.
Okay, got it. Charles, that's the same for you too?
Principally, yes. Right. And
Yeah.
it seems like in the last 9 months, that's been the majority of our work.
Yeah. And then Conway, you're primarily Canadian, is that right? Do you find that those regulators are aligning well with like the United States? What's going on there? Or do you?
Yeah, we're located in Canada. We do have clients kind of around the world. We do focus more on the carbon capture side of things, but what we've seen, you know, in Alberta, they're quite open to subsurface storage of CO2, as in Saskatchewan. Jurisdictions where the subsurface is quite well characterized, there's a lot of oil and gas exploration, there's a lot of good data available. Those regulators seem to be more open to having a conversation about how to permit these things effectively. You know, in Saskatchewan, we kind of had to blaze some trail 10 years ago when we were considering the Banner Dam Unit 3 project. But it helped having a regulator that was familiar with subsurface geology, and I think the same thing would ring true in the United States and globally. You know, and we actually have an advantage in North America in that we have onshore storage. A lot of other jurisdictions looking at offshore storage, boats, and offshore wells, which just drive up the cost of your transportation and storage side of CCS.
I do have a few other questions here, but again, if anybody in the audience wants to pose a question, we'd be happy to take them. And we do have one question that was asked to Joe's presentation, like on your presentation in the platform. The question is, how is the presence of CO2 plume defined? Does the definition incorporate a minimum thickness, saturation, mass cutoff, or anything else?
Yeah, it's really where you've got a material amount of the supercritical phase CO2. That's the definition of when we talk about plumes. We're really talking about that supercritical phase.
But how is the presence of the plume defined?
Well, there's a couple ways. I guess you could, you can detect it through indirect measurements like 4D seismic, like they've done at the Schliepner field over the past decade, or at some point, the CO2 plume may encounter one of your monitor wells in the injection zone, and so that would be sort of a direct evidence of the plume's presence at that point.
Got it. One other question from the same guy from your presentation. He said, how do you recommend handling the mineral estate with respect to saline CO2 storage?
That's an interesting question. Yeah.
There's a little follow-up question too. He says, does CO2 injection preclude quote unquote reasonable use?
Yeah, it's a concern, right? You probably don't want to be drilling through an active CO2 storage project and plume to get to deeper mineral rights. So, if you are a mineral rights holder and you've got prospective resources below the target injection interval, it's probably in your best interest to develop them sooner rather than later if you're interested in producing those hydrocarbons. You can probably get a permit to produce your hydrocarbons faster than an injection project can get a Class 6 permit, frankly. So, it certainly complicates things by going after it. I'm not a lawyer. My understanding is the mineral rights mineral owners have the right to go develop their resources. And so, going after those would be within their rights, whether or not somebody had designs or hopes to use an area for storage resources.
Yeah, we're working on a project right now where one set of cousins owns the pore space and the other set of cousins owns the mineral rights, and it looks like it might turn into the Hatfields and McCoys by the time it's done. If you're gonna store CO2, at 5,000 feet and you got an oil field at 8,000 feet, it'll get worked out in the court, but have you created a drilling hazard? Is it going to cost an extra $1 million to set another string of pipe to get through that storage horizon? And do you even want to drill through it? Have you effectively condemned the minerals?
Richard, see if you can get us an invitation to that Thanksgiving, because I'd like to be there.
Yeah.
Hey, Lesley, I have a question in the audience here.
Oh yeah, please.
So we were talking about just now the verticality of CO2 lease spacing rights. Oh yeah, sorry, I'll share my video. There we go. So we talked about the verticality of lease spacing rights, but what about horizontal in similar ways of E&P play where you would all be draining in the same field and you might deplete someone else's asset that's leased in the same area? And the CO2 plumes were kind of, example that comes to mind is Talos picked up some acreage in the Gulf of Mexico right next to Exxon, and the sinks, a couple, looks like their bounds might be outside of the lease bounds, so they could technically be injecting into the same sink. How we picture that playing out? Is it do you picture that first come first serve, first one to fill it up, or what are some of the complexities that we can envision in scenarios like that and plume invasion?
So let me throw just 2 cents in on that. So we sit on the ad hoc committee in Louisiana, and one of the topics that comes up has been discussed at length is mineral rights infringement or conflict with CO2 pore space infringement, which lends exactly to this point. So there's there is no clear defined path that has been identified yet. As Dick mentioned, it will get settled in the courts eventually. Okay. But the way we anticipate it's going to shake out is your CO2 projects are going to start in proximity and everything's going to flow okay until production is impacted, and then the alarms are going to go off, flags are going to raise, and we're going to try to at that point figure out what's going to happen. We do believe as an industry group in Louisiana that there's going to be some litigation involved in these projects. How that's going to shake out exactly, we don't know yet.
Yeah, I've heard one of the biggest timber companies in Texas that doesn't have the mineral rights, and I've heard them say if they think they're gonna, or it basically the mineral owners are saying if they think they're gonna store on my land and me not get anything out of it, they're crazy. We're gonna end up in court.
Yeah, there's been, some litigation, not for CCS particularly, but there's, relevant case law to this effect that the Haynes and Boonfolk in my presentation discussed, where, you've really, a prudent operator's really got to understand it, especially if there are production pressure sinks just off boundary. You really got to understand that geology. You got to understand where the plume's going to go. And a prudent operator shouldn't be planning on their plume leaving their acreage, right? Like, and you've got to understand the sensitivities and the uncertainties of the subsurface really well before you make that investment decision to go forward with that kind of project.
And I think there's one more thing to add to that is that, again, going to the fruit tree, we're in the first phase of plucking the low-hanging fruit off of the tree on the prime real estate projects. I think that the initial projects we're going to see, like, for example, the example you brought up, Talos and Exxon in the shared pore space or shared acreage offshore. Most likely, the carbon injection is not going to be pumped into the producing intervals at this time. And so, because we work on a lot of projects with nearby production surrounding us, but most of that is deeper than where we're going for our injection, and it's surrounding just outside of our plume.
Quick correction on that, Steve, as I was talking about two CCUS injection sites running into each other. So two plumes hitting into the same sink, one possibly the one filling up first, affecting the volume and injection rate of the second.
So the pore space. So what's going to happen is if you're close enough, potentially two things could happen. One, pressure influences could start conflicting and competing with each other in the well. So it's going to require additional horsepower to push the same gas into the pore space, number one. And number two, you're going to see the plumes blend and mix. And so, at that point, I don't know as if you're going to be able to tell whose carbon dioxide is whose. You're not going to be able to know, well, this molecule came from Exxon and this came from Talos, and they're on opposite sides of the boundary. I think at that point, it's just going to be a merged pore space boundary, and everyone has their lease rights. And they actually, as I think about that situation, that may be the optimum situation for well placements that you can come up with. Because one of the things that's killing us in the Gulf Coast region, as an example, is the gas wants to float to the top and take off, and we're only, as an effect, we're only able to utilize less than 5% of the pore space in many cases. You're at 2% utilization of pore space because it goes to the top, and when you look down on it, your footprint from a plan view looking down, that's the extent of your plume. Even though all of the pore space, 95% of that pore space underneath that footprint is still saline bound. And so if you have two that run into each other, you no longer have to worry about your molecules going on their land, their molecules going on yours. And you can start to fill up more and more and more of that pore space. And there's no conflict at that point, except for the pressure influence.
I will tell you, I think there's going to end up being some legislative action needed. These are unforeseen consequences when the laws were created, both at a state level and at a federal level, that this will have to be dealt with either in the courts or hopefully preempted by the legislature to, understand when you have those situations, how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I agree with that, Richard, that we're going to see that from the court's perspective for the legislative side, but I think also for the competition side. So this is revenue and industry for some of these states. So I think there is an incentive for them to make their state be more appealing to those who want to invest in energy transition or CCUS. And we're going to see it internationally too. We've heard other countries looking at the IRA as a way to get some of that green investment that's now being redirected to the US that might have been directed elsewhere pre-IRA. And so I think there's going to be international competition and state-to-state competition for that as well to see who can do it best, but then also some that are just staying out of it altogether because that's not in their political will. But that's great points. Thanks, guys.
Okay, switching topics a little bit, I would like to talk a little bit more about Conway's project. The Sask Power Boundary Dam Unit 3 is the world's first fully integrated carbon capture facility on a commercial power plant. And it's captured and safely sequestered more than 5 million tons of CO2 to date. So Conway, it's just really incredible that you've been a part of that whole process. Like, what a testament to you guys and to your skills. If there was one aspect of the design, if there was one aspect of the BD3 project you would change, what would it be and why?
Thanks, Lesley. So there are a lot of things we'd like to change, but if we had to pick one, it would be kind of under the envelope of characterizing your flue gas. And in this application, because this power plant burns coal, it would be the fly ash situation. So we had, we have some cleanup equipment that takes out 99.5% of the fly ash particles that are produced, but that remaining 0.5% still gets into this closed loop system, which is the amine capture system that's employed at Boundary Dam Unit 3. And it's caused us problems. It's caused us, back pressure problems, throughput problems. The other thing that was unforeseen, power utilities study their fly ash. They actually get to know it quite well. And Sask Power thought that they understood their fly ash very well through years and years of testing. But these smaller 0.5% components of the fly ash that actually get through the electrostatic precipitator, they had a different chemistry, and that wasn't foreseen. So the different chemistry in these fly ash particles had more reactivity with the amine than was expected. So it's kind of a double whammy with fly ash. It's the back pressure and the fouling, which was sort of predicted was going to happen, and it's been a little worse than was expected. But it's the other reactions and the degradation of the amine. So if we did have a time machine, if you go back, 10 years to when we were designing Boundary Dam Unit 3, that's something that would be changed, would be better understanding our flue gas, even though we thought we had it understood quite well, and doing a more robust method of pre-treating the flue gas and cleaning it up prior to the capture.
So if you were to start this project again tomorrow, does like the technology or does the process exist yet to be able to mitigate those problems?
Yeah, we've talked to people and we're dealing with clients in similar situations, be it in the cement industry or the steel industry or the power industry, where they have particulate matter coming into the system. And at Boundary Dam Unit 3, we have a dry electrostatic precipitator, and that gets out this 99.5%. There are other types of dust capture equipment you can employ. It could be a bag house, a dry bag house, fabric filter, or it could be a wet electrostatic precipitator that would take out these small residual particles. And for Boundary Dam Unit 3, we would have done a wet electrostatic precipitator as opposed to the existing dry that we just sort of upgraded and made work a little bit better. We would replace that with a wet. And that's what we would recommend to anybody in this sort of situation.
And the cost to retrofit that at this point, it just doesn't make sense, or?
Yeah, where there's too much sunk cost to go back and pull out the existing precipitator and put in a wet electrostatic precipitator. That's been considered,
Sure.
but it doesn't make sense. Yeah, good question, good point.
Cool, thanks. We do have a question here from the audience. Looks like it's for Charles. You mentioned in your presentation that it's an estimated 3 to 4 years from non-disclosure agreements to injection. Do you think this is a realistic timeline, and do you see any possible delays with the complexities associated with partnerships needed for cluster/hub infrastructure, particularly in the North Gulf Coast region?
Sure, good question. I mean, look, let me be real clear. Who knows? Right now, exactly right. So that presentation is one that, frankly, we've used with pore space owners. We like to under promise and over deliver, hopefully. We have a couple of projects that are class 2 in nature, and we anticipate, like in Texas, 12 to 18 months from NDA to closing. And we're close. We're hoping by the end of this year to have an injection well on a class 2 injecting. So much of our business is associated with the capture equipment, which is the long lead items in a long time. And obviously, we've all been discussing class 6 applications. That's just something we put together from when we start meeting with an emitter to the end. We've got a few emitter agreements locked up finally, and we are hoping that we beat that time frame. With hubs, there obviously is complexity. We've taken 2 large tracts of land between Houston and Beaumont, and we have an LOI with a publicly traded midstream company to build a hub concept. They have minimum volumes before they've started taking right of way, but before they'll start really spending real dollars. And so they need 6 million tons to make sure of emitter commitments, minimum volume commitments. And so we're dealing with some smaller volumes that we commonly referred to as pre-combustion, that are pure, which just require dehy and compression. And we are obviously dealing with the difficulties of trying to make economic post-combustion flue gas at like 6% volume. So I know that didn't really answer your question, other than it seems like the hubs, because of the nature of and the expense of the pipe versus a discrete project where we have a source and a sink and a 4 to 10 mile pipe, those can be executed much quicker.
Marissa, do you want to ask any follow-up questions? I see you're up there. Oh, I think you're muted.
I do that every day, Melissa.
Her mic isn't working, she said. Perfect timing, right? Of course, always. Okay, well, feel free to jump back in, I guess, if you can get that sorted.
That or Marissa, just message me or send me a message on LinkedIn or an email.
Okay, switching over to Josh Neese with PHDwin. PHDwin has primarily been known as a reserves software, one of the top 2 reserve softwares. But I see that now you guys have started your own CCS emissions calculations. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
And I apologize, my internet has decided to be bad as soon as all this got started. It was running really well this morning. So stick with me if it's a shaky image or audio. So as I discussed in my presentation, one of the big things we force upon people or instill in people is the product discipline, the idea of controlling what products are available, how they're calculated, but then giving users the ability to change that calculation up as needed for the particular areas that they're working with. Now, one other thing that we do really well is economics and particular things like group economics. So talking about the expense of running those hubs and calculating the expense and running those economics for your projects. This is something that comes up for us on a regular basis. Where do we put those expenses? How do we calculate them? Or how do we allocate them down to the appropriate entities? And one of the things we're talking to a lot of people is how do you differentiate and identify those unit-based expenses where you can actually take your necessary requirements for running a particular well versus a field and break those down into the unit requirements so you can calculate a BOE or horsepower requirement for calculating those expenses, or a CO2 or cost per MCF of CO2 expenses for the particular well. or where those expenses are not shared or are not allocated to an individual well, but are shared expenses. How do we allocate that to the individual cases, and in particular, where we have variable ownerships in these assets is when doing that aggregation, we have a tendency to gear and lean towards a volume-based allocation methodology. It's kind of ingrained into us. But we have found that if we go back and we look at the economics of all the individual wells before we do the allocations, and we then allocate all of our expenses on a profit basis, so that the projects are all benefiting from this investment, we actually get longer life, and we're able to do much more detailed evaluation down to the individual well level for who gets how much of these expenses. And we found that that turns around and gives the operator something to go back to the landowners with and show them that little bit of benefit that they receive by being inside of this project. So a little bit of a benefit to the operator, but also in how they're going to sell it to the people they're buying land rights from as well, for how they're going to calculate those expenses.
Joe, you use PHDwin often, don't you? Is that one of the main softwares that you guys use, or are you guys an area shop?
We use all the software, I guess, just depending on our clients. We also have our own proprietary software that we primarily use called Presto. That kind of does the same thing with CO2 flows, revenues from various sources, and cash flowing them out with group economics.
Yeah, got it. Cool. I forgot you guys use Presto. Okay, let's say I got just a couple more questions here, unless you guys have questions for each other. You guys are all in the space, leaders in your realm. So yeah, I'd be curious if you guys had any questions for each other. I'm not getting any more from the audience right now, so. Okay, I've got a question for everybody. What are your thoughts on the current CO2 market and how CCS will impact it?
Well, I guess I can just, maybe a year or 18 months ago, some of our clients were having discussions with emitters, and it seemed like a lot of the discussions was on, you have $1 per ton all of a sudden. So where the people who are currently emitting, venting to atmosphere, started to attribute, value to this waste stream that they were just emitting. And the discussions were kind of around how much of that pie of revenue that the emitters were going to get. And so I thought that was a really interesting dynamic early on. I feel like that's maybe become less of an issue, but maybe some of the other folks here have some more anecdotes they might be able to share.
I just think it's so early that we're seeing every type of deal that could ever be imagined getting papered up. I think they're coming to some solutions. Early on, it was a question of how you're going to paper this up with the landowners. And I think that's getting worked out in the system. It's basically probably because we sent oil and gas landmen out to get pore space rights. A lot of the contracts are looking a lot like an oil and gas lease. So that was always interesting to think about how this could evolve.
Charles or Conway, would you like to weigh in on that question about how current CO2 markets and how CCS will impact it moving forward?
I'm going to just mirror Dick's comments. Every single deal we have, save and except a few landowner deals, are very nuanced and different. And we've made proposals. We spent years, some of the times a couple of years, with the same emitter, and they're all getting very intelligent about it. Post IRA, what was, I think, Joe was saying earlier, what was formerly trash is now treasure. And it looked like it started, there were only a few public leases for, let's talk about this pore space owner, that were available to be reviewed. I'm a former glorified landman, former lawyer, ran an oil company. And I got to tell you, it was a very efficient market in the oil and gas space. There was mineralforum.com, and Joe Farmer could talk to Jack Farmer and get online, or go to the coffee shop and know exactly what the mineral rights were worth. Now that we've seen everything in the offshore leases. I think we talked about Talos earlier. The state of Texas or the GLO has and they're about to do another FOA or another bid process, excuse me, not a FOA. And they have a revenue sharing agreement. I think most of the pore space owners we're dealing with started with a small or annual bonus and then an injection fee. Now we're getting clarification from Treasury as to when developers will be paid. And so we're trying to tie our leases to that. So we're not financing a year's worth of injections to be paid the following year in the first quarter. So it's I think it'll become an efficient market. But as far as the value of CO2, both to the emitters and as well as to the pore space owners, varies so dramatically. And I think we'll get to an efficient market here soon.
I just layer in a slightly different view of the market, and more so from the emitter's perspective. But it was mentioned earlier, the Inflation Reduction Act and how it enhanced 45Q and the certainty that's available to CO2 emitters and producers in the United States. Every other jurisdiction is really looking to the United States jealously and pressuring their governments to try to do what the United States have done, again, to stem that flow of capital from kind of around the world for these multinational corporations to the United States. The business case looks much better because you have that certainty, right? You know for every ton of CO2 that you capture, you get this $85 back for it. Other jurisdictions where there isn't that level of certainty, it's a lot harder. And the open markets for CO2 are a complex beast. And people have been working on these open markets for years with the trading and the quantification and the verification of different types of credits. It's a very complicated space. So I think what we're seeing right now is everybody's kind of jealous of you folks, our neighbors to the south.
Yeah, that probably would have changed up the project economics for your 5 million tons of CO2 you've already sequestered, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, kind of like almost a final question here. What technology that isn't yet created, technology or service product that isn't yet created that would make the biggest impact on CCS?
I'll give it to Conway. It's capture technology. If you capture it for less money, it makes the storing is the easy part.
Yeah,
agree. Yeah, I would say a paradigm shift in direct air capture.
I think the other piece that we hear a lot as well is utilization, right? Because we do have a lot of public opposition, even though everyone in this call knows how safe it is, the general public doesn't. If there was a utilization technology that was scalable and could actually, handle the millions and millions of tons per year that are required to make a difference, that would help a lot. And it kind of speaks to the point that was made earlier about all of the really sweet areas, the good spots going to be used the next 10 to 15 years. In a perfect world, in 10 to 15 years, some sort of utilization technology that's economical and scalable, that would be fantastic. And there's no end of opportunity on the capture side. We're talking to a lot of people, and really one of the things that we tell them is it really depends on your timeline, what sort of capture technology you use. If you're one of these hard to abate sectors that need to do post-combustion, if you need to do something in the next decade, the commercially available technology really is still liquid amine post-combustion capture. A lot of other technology are getting closer, be it membrane, solids absorbent, cryogenics, but they're just not there today. And when corporations are being asked to make, billion-dollar level decisions, they're not going to want to be the first one out of the gate, the first one to take a risk on a new technology. And if you're in this shorter sort of window with a 2030, 2035 target, you're likely stuck with this technology that we know works and can work better than it does for us on our project. But it's expensive. It really is. And it's not something that adds to your bottom line. It's not something that produces revenue for you. It's typically a cost outside of for the United States, where you do have some certainty. And if you bring the cost down enough, it could actually be a revenue maker. But there are a number of things that I think we're going to see this space change a lot in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Jason, did you have a question you'd like to ask the panel here?
There we go. Should be unmuted now.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I put it out on the chat, but obviously there's been a lot of work being done by oil and gas companies, startup companies, and everywhere in between in the world of carbon capture and sequestration. But there's a lot of work coming out of the government, if you will, the US DOE, with their various funding opportunities for clean energy and demonstrations, things like that. So I'm just curious, what's your guys' thought on how is their work going to impact the world of CCUS?
Yeah, I don't mind grabbing that one at all. I think mirroring what everyone said in the last question, capture costs, CapEx and OpEx are the biggest problems with our business right now. And we've spent a couple of years with several natural gas cogen facilities trying to figure out how to make it economic. I remember sitting at a coffee shop with the chairman of a very large publicly traded electricity company. He said, Charles, if we get to $85, we're your partner, we're in business. Well, we're at $85 and they're still not our partner and they're still not in business. The DOE's recent announcement is exciting because we're not a technology company. We're a bunch of old oil and gas people. We use all the same EPCs that you all have utilized or know, and some of the folks here, but trying to figure out how we can capture excess heat and lower our OpEx costs of our capture islands, just anything we can do. But if you can qualify for one of these DOE grants, which we've applied for one on a sequestration side, boy, it supercharges the economics and it makes it far more, it makes these projects jump forward. So I applaud the administration for giving us those right now, and I hope that a lot of companies go after.
You're thinking about the guys at Red Trail. Yeah. Oh, got it.
We don't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Not sure who that was. Okay, cool.
And make sure that I'm right there. I may be off in terms
As
of
John Roosevelt, he needs to be muted.
Okay, thanks. Cool, great, thanks for that.
I think I'll just layer one more thing on that. And one thing that we see from all these government investments that lead into FEED studies and looking at better ways to do things, right? And looking at ways, as Charles mentioned, the heat integration and bringing down that OpEx over time. All these things are super beneficial for the whole industry. And typically when people like the DOE fund a project, then they publish all the results. So everybody can see all these innovations that were made and all these learnings, and it gets shared around. And that's really kind of the mandate of our organization, is we want to share with people what we learned going through this first of a kind project. What are the things we would do if we had that time machine? How can we better control operating costs over time in these facilities? There's a lot of opportunity on that side. And it is fantastic what the DOE are doing, because they fund a lot of different studies, and we use their outputs as a resource all the time.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. As Charles, you mentioned some of the funding and things, and actually I was part of some of recent merit panel reviews on some of the funding opportunities that have been put in there. And so just reading through some of these, it's very interesting, the various industries that are coming forward and trying to progress these type of projects. And it's good to know from you, Conway, that all that data is coming out and is being very useful to everyone. I mean, I guess on that end, a lot of the conversations that we had in a panel review was really around, understanding the content of, your flue gas, like you were talking about before and things. So that's very important. So I guess a follow-up question, at least on that to you, Conway, is as that project moved forward, the BD3 project, did that rely on any piloting projects to try and then scale up from?
Yes, it did. And that project was early on enough that there were a lot of risk mitigation efforts that went in. One of them was a pilot. So a small scale pilot was installed at one of Fast Power's lignite fired coal facilities to test the performance of the carbon capture system. But the issue that we had was the focus really was around the energy consumption, which is an important factor. But we didn't focus on the side reactions and the amine degradation potential and the influence of things like fly ash and different constituents in the flue gas. So a more robust, this is another one of these time machine things, but if we went back, we would test for some of these other things in addition to that energy penalty. Because the energy penalty came back really kind of where we expected it to be, and it's performing where we expected it to perform as well. It's these other unforeseen things that when we talk to people that are considering CCS, we really do talk about understanding your flue gas and doing some detailed measurement well beyond what you're doing today to really minimize the risk. I was going to say de-risk, but that doesn't exist. But minimize the risk of some of these side reactions and keep your operating costs at a more acceptable level.
Great. Thanks for the answers, everyone.
I don't have any more questions. If anybody else has any more questions from the audience, now would be the time to raise your hand or go ahead and share your screen and we can bring you up. Great. Hey, Derek.
Hey, just one quick question, and if anybody, you might have differing opinions on this, but if you were screening out particular projects, would the quality of the sink, the vicinity to emissions, or the land lease complexity be the #1 rated thing that would determine which one you'd pick? So quality of sink, distance to emitters, or the land lease complexity? What do y'all think?
I mean, from a project level, maybe Charles has a different perspective, but those could all be deal breakers, but they kind of are trade-offs, right? You can overcome crummy rock by adding more transportation to get you over where the good rock is, right? So there's a lot of trade-offs that kind of interplay, and it's sort of the game of development is optimizing those pieces, and accepting the trade-offs and coming to the best possible outcome.
Wholly agree with that assessment. Yeah, I mean, for us, it starts with the sink. There are occasions where we have in the Rockies one formation that we can inject into. It's just one lobe. It's not a multi-stack like we have in the Gulf Coast and some of these depositional environments or sandstones. So it all depends on, but it's a trade-off. That's what makes this business so interesting. But every single one of them is a deal killer, and some of them, but you can overcome the sink, I guess.
Steve, any final thoughts, parting comments there?
No, I would agree that, I mean, from our key consideration is a viable project, location, proximity to emitters, all of those are secondary if the project's not going to work. So it's the subsurface. Do you have any deal killers that are identified, or do you have any economic complications with artificial penetrations that are going to make the project unpalatable for investors and further progress?
I think one other factor that could be added to that whole decision-making piece is back to the public engagement side of things and the public acceptance in the local area. That's getting to be more and more of an issue as has already been discussed. You guys are well aware of it. I'd probably layer that fourth variable in there as well.
Yeah, that's very important. Yep. Well, if anybody else has anything else, then I think we can go ahead and just wrap this up. I really appreciate all of you guys for sharing your wealth of knowledge with all of us here at CarbonExpo and for taking the time to meet with us this afternoon to answer some of our questions. So thank you guys so much for all the hard work that you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.